Good morning, friends. Welcome to all of you. We are very fortunate that Professor Narahari with us. Of course, Professor Narahari is a friend, probably a part of IIIT-B. So we don't have to introduce him that much. But see, one thing with Professor Narahari is that whatever he does, he is perfect. Meaning, now I don't know whether to introduce him or this book. Okay, that's what he has written a book on game theory and mechanism design. Yeah, so it's an effort of 6 years of work with his PhD students and things like that. So without taking much, of course, one more common thing between me and Professor Narahari is that both are alumni of National College. So without taking much time, I request Professor Narahari to deliver the talk. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Professor Dinesha, and thank you, Professor Prasanna, for calling me here. So I'll have the pleasure of talking to all of you over the next 2 hours or so on game theory and mechanism design. Let me try to give you an outline of what I'm going to do. So this will be in 3 parts. In part 1, we'll look at why game theory and mechanism design. Why do we need to study GTMD? So I'll try to give some motivating examples of what I call strategic networks, crowds, and markets. In the second part, we'll try to give an overview of game theory. What I will try to cover here is strategic form games, the notion of Nash Equilibrium, and briefly introduce cooperative games. And in part 3, I will try to look at mechanism design. So here I'll try to give some examples and some key theorems. I would like to make one point very clear right away. Game theory is concerned with analysis of games, whereas mechanism design is concerned with design of games. One is game theory is analysis, and mechanism design is design of games. So that will be the structure of this presentation. So let me start by saying that over the last 15 years, there is a convergence of game theory and computer science. What do I mean by that? So if you look at this person here, does anybody recognize this? This is John von Neumann. Now, John von Neumann was at the Center for Advanced Study at Princeton in the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. And then there was a splendid collaboration between von Neumann and Oscar Morgenstern. Oscar Morgenstern was a celebrated economist in those days. As far as John von Neumann goes, he is the creator of many intellectual currents during the 20s, 30s, and 40s. For example, he was the one who came up with the notion of a digital computer. So you talk about von Neumann model of computing. He was the one who defined the notion of complexity of an algorithm. And it turns out that he was the creator of this intellectual discipline called game theory also. So you would see that during 1928 to 1944, during the 16-year collaboration between von Neumann and Oscar Morgenstern, they actually developed all the foundations of game theory. And they wrote a book. It is called The Theory of Games and Economic Behavior. It is a 1,000-page book which was published in 1944, and to this day this continues to be an authentic source of all the early results on game theory. Now, during these 16 years, von Neumann was working on game theory on the one hand and was working on computer science on the other hand, and in addition to that, he was also working on several other different topics. Now you would see that 1920s to 2000, almost 70 to 80 years. 70 to 80 years later, these two intellectual currents called computer science and game theory have converged. And you will see this convergence between game theory and computer science blooming like anything in the last decade or so. And you have all the game theory legends here. Many of them happen to be Nobel laureates. You have von Neumann here, you have John Nash here, Robert Aumann here, Thomas Schelling, then you have Lloyd Shapley, and you have Leonid Hurwitz, you have Eric Maskin, you have Roger Meyerson. They are all, except for von Neumann, they are all Nobel laureates. Von Neumann is something beyond Nobel Prize. He should have got several Nobel Prizes. Then on the other hand, you also have all these celebrities in computer science here. Does anybody recognize this person? This is Edsger Dijkstra. And I have also included here Professor Ravi Kannan, our own Indian prodigy, Professor Ravi Kannan, who works in algorithms. He's also working on some very interesting aspects of algorithmic game theory. And you would see that applications like the sponsored search auctions on search engines, then design of electronic markets of various kinds, and social network analysis and so on. So these are all some modern applications which have been revolutionized because of this marriage between game theory and computer science. In some sense, this provides the underlying theme for our talk today. Now, game theory traditionally was a discipline of microeconomics, and it is the science of economics, and that was the situation during the 1940s, 50s, 60s and so on. But now it turns out that in the 1990s and 2000s, you can see that game theory has entered everywhere, and almost every leading computer science department in the world currently has a group on algorithmic game theory. Now, let's get into the issue of why one would like to use game theory and mechanism design before getting into what is game theory and mechanism design. I will try to provide several examples here, and please interrupt me whenever you feel like, so that things will be clear then and there itself. Don't postpone your questions till the end of the session today. Please feel free to interrupt anytime. Now, let's start with an example of geospatial exploration. And as an example of this, I would like to talk about the DARPA Red Balloon Challenge. So this challenge was as follows. This was sometime in late 2009. So here you see the map of United States. You can as well imagine the India map here. And DARPA announced in September or October of 2009 that on a designated day, which is exactly 1 month away, 10 red balloons will be launched in 10 undisclosed locations in continental America. And they said that whichever team is able to locate all these 10 balloons will be declared as the winner, and they are supposed to locate these balloons in less than 24 hours, and they can win a prize of $40,000. So this was the DARPA Red Balloon Challenge, and this challenge was accepted by several teams all over the United States, and 50 plus teams participated in this contest. And there was not much time. There was only 1 month time. And a team from MIT came to know about this exactly 1 week before the red balloons were to be launched. So they put together a team, and they came up with a protocol by which what they did was to first recruit a team of core volunteers. Now, these core volunteers were geographically dispersed throughout the United States for obvious reasons, because these 10 balloons can be launched anywhere in USA. And then this team of first level volunteers recruited second level volunteers. Each one would recruit a second level a team of second level volunteers. And the second level volunteers recruited third level volunteers. And third level volunteers recruited fourth level volunteers and so on. And then they had the following incentive scheme. See, in life, unless you provide incentives, nothing will happen. People will work, students will work, and teachers will work only with incentives. So the incentive scheme that was designed in this MIT scheme was the following. It was very simple. $40,000 you take, there are 10 red balloons, divide 40,000 by 10, you get $4,000. $4,000 per red balloon. Now, you have first level volunteers, second level volunteers, third level volunteers, and so on. They said, whoever discovers a balloon will get $2,000. And whoever has recruited the person who discovered the balloon will get $1,000. And whoever recruited the person who discovered the balloon will get $500. And then $250, $125. You have a beautiful geometric series. And the sum of this geometric series will never exceed $4,000. This was the incentive scheme. So because of this incentive scheme, in a record time of 5 or 6 days, they were able to put together a fantastic team of volunteers. And it turned out that when the red balloons were actually launched on that day, all these balloons were discovered by the MIT team in 9 hours 52 minutes. Now, one can look at several different aspects of this MIT scheme. So as I told you, so you have several different levels of volunteers. So you can see here is a situation where this D will get $2,000, C will get $1,000, B will get $500, A will get $250. But A will also get $500 for having recruited another person who recruited another person who discovered the balloon and so on. So this is an excellent recursive payment scheme. And it turns out that this scheme also has excellent game theoretic properties. They actually showed that game theory and mechanism design can be used for coming up with such incentive protocols which can be used for geospatial exploration of the sky. Now let me give you another example. Look at crowdsourcing for an application like digital epidemiology.
For MIT, it was just an ad hoc scheme without going into game theory.
A lot of thought went into it, but post facto, it turned out that researchers did a lot of analysis of the schemes, and they found that it had a lot of merits. It also had a lot of problems. In fact, one of my own PhD students, he found a lot of mistakes with the scheme and actually improved and extended and enhanced this particular scheme and so on. Right? So game theory and mechanism design can actually play a very important role in the design of such mechanisms.
At that time it was just ad hoc.
It was just ad hoc, and the whole thing was put together in 7 days. But a lot of thought went into it. Right? So you can see that technologies like mobile computing was used, social network media was used, crowdsourcing was used, technologies of various kinds were used in the recruitment process and so on. Right. So it's a fascinating story, and you can actually get into Wikipedia, and it has lots of details. It is also very instructive to look at what the other teams did. For example, the Georgia Tech team, they were able to discover 9 red balloons, but their protocol actually has better properties than the MIT protocol. Right here. Okay, my next example is on the phenomenon of crowdsourcing. I'm sure all of you are familiar with crowdsourcing. Now here, let's say that there is a region here. So assume that this is the state of Karnataka. And right now there is an epidemic in this region, assume. And then a public health organization would like to quickly identify what are the problem areas in this region. And so what they would like to do is, because Karnataka itself is a big area, perhaps they may like to use crowdsourcing in order to do that. So what are the crowd workers supposed to do here? They're supposed to label these regions. You can see this is the labeled region. Labeled region basically means that these red parts here are highly susceptible to that epidemic, whereas the light green parts are not so susceptible. You can actually classify different parts of this region, right, based on the degree of susceptibility to that epidemic, right? And because the region itself is a very vast area, you would like to use a very large number of crowd workers to do this job for you. But you would like the crowd workers to do this job for you in the best possible way. You would like all the crowd workers to put in their best efforts, and not only that, they are supposed to report to you what they have exactly found while surveying that region. So you would see that whether you are talking about the red balloon challenge or you are talking about this crowdsourcing example here, the main players here are going to be human beings. And when you are dealing with human beings, you have to also deal with the behavior of the human beings, and that is where game theory and mechanism design will come in. So let's go through one more example. So this is, everybody is talking about massively online open courses, and all of these MOOCs also have what are called as online educational forums, and you would see that the student-teacher ratios can be extremely high, and the dropout rates also can be extremely high. If you really want to get the best out of MOOCs, if you want to make it a very effective medium of instruction, then what is it that you have to do? You have to improve and enhance the level of participation of the instructors and also the students. Now, both the instructor and the students again are human beings, and you would like to look at their behavioral patterns and see what best you can do, what kind of mechanisms can you design so that their level of participation can be increased, right? So that's another issue with design of these online courses. Now let's look at an application like social network analysis. Everybody knows about social networks. Now the individual nodes in the social network typically will correspond again to individuals or social entities. Now there is a particular problem here which is called as the discovering influential nodes. So if you are given a social network with millions of nodes, and you want to find out let's say 100 most influential nodes in that social network. Now the level of influence of these nodes will depend on the application that you are talking about. One application could be viral marketing. In viral marketing, what you do is that you have a new product and you want to maximize the information diffusion about this new product. So what you will do is maybe you will choose a subset of 100 nodes, give them free samples, and hope that because these are very influential customers for you, these customers will then diffuse information about this product and make that product and result in a viral campaign. So this is an application called viral marketing. Another application could be sometimes you may like to limit the influence of a negative campaign. Assume that there is a negative campaign that is going on, and you now want to trigger a positive campaign which will limit the influence of this negative campaign. So then again, you will not be able to trigger this limiting activity at each and every node of the social network because you are dealing with millions of nodes. So what you would like to do is you will again like to choose a subset of these nodes and trigger this positive campaign at these subset of nodes and hope that because of the influence that these nodes have on the other nodes of the social network, the effects of the negative campaign are completely mitigated. So this is another application. And now if you want to do this very effectively, you are again dealing with social entities or human beings here. So you have to take into account the strategic nature of these human beings if you want to come up with a very effective model. Now there are many other applications. I will not spend too much time on these applications. For example, the sponsored search auction, where you have advertisers and you have keyword auctions where when you type in a keyword, then you get not only a number of organic links, but you also get sponsored links corresponding to the advertisers who have got something to do with this particular keyword here. And where the advertisers get placed here, is it the first slot or the second slot or the third slot and so on, will be decided by an auction that goes on in the background, And the design of this auction plays a very important role in the revenues that will accrue to the search engine. Now, it is said that Google makes 70% of its revenue through auctions of this type. And so how does Google make its revenue? Whenever a user clicks on any one of these ads, the company corresponding to this particular ad will end up paying a certain amount of money to Google. Now, because the amount of revenue that the portals will make is going to be very huge, the design of the auction, so what's the underlying auction here? All the advertisers will place bids on a particular keyword here, and then the auction mechanism will decide who will get the first slot, who will get the second slot, who will get the third slot. The auction mechanism will also decide how much each one of these advertisers will pay to Google when their particular slot is clicked, right?
So the payment will be different if mine is in the first slot versus mine is in the fourth.
Yes, so somebody who has bid 20 rupees will get the first slot, somebody who has bid 15 rupees may get the second slot, and so on. And the amount of money that they are going to pay also is going to be different, right? We are going to look at some auction models, right, which are actually used in this context. So here again, advertisers are very strategic, right? They would like to place their bids very strategically. So now game theory and mechanism design will become very useful in designing auctions which are good for the advertisers and which are also good for the search engine here. Okay, so you can also talk about procurement auctions, and you can even talk about applications like carbon footprint optimization. And my last example is on matching markets. Now, the reason I'm talking about matching markets is because the 2012 Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences was awarded to Lloyd Shapley and Alvin Roth, and so they made pioneering contributions to the theory of stable allocations and the practice of market design. And what is a matching market? A matching market is something which will match students to colleges, or employees to companies, or doctors to hospitals, or agricultural farmers to ultimate consumers. Now, if you can design the matching market in a way that it is good for the buyers and also the sellers, and also perhaps the intermediaries who are involved in the market, now such a market mechanism is in some sense going to be socially optimal. So if you want to design markets which will maximize the social welfare, then it turns out that game theory and mechanism design will have to be used in a fairly intensive way to design such markets. Now here again you will see that the players involved here, they are all strategic. They may not tell you the true information, and the effort should be to extract the true information from all the players involved here and run the optimization algorithms on the true information that you have got. Okay, so after looking at all these examples, the case for game theory and mechanism design is becoming more and more clear. So many of these modern problems that we have talked about, they involve strategic agents. Now these are strategic agents who know the algorithms which are used in all of these institutions, and they can manipulate these algorithms. How they can manipulate these algorithms, we'll see several examples of that. Now, because they can manipulate, and because a lot of information is private to these individuals, and they may not reveal this information truthfully, then the algorithms also will not work in an optimal way. So if you want to make all these algorithms work in an optimal way, you have to make all of the agents reveal their private information in a truthful way, right? So we would like to see how the strategic play of the various players involved here can be taken care of. Now secondly, and this is a very important question that is addressed by game theory and mechanism design, we would like to realize social goals in the presence of such self-interested agents, right? So here we are all self-interested agents. Now we want to maximize the social welfare, right, in the presence of self-interested agents. Now what do you mean by a self-interested agent? Each agent or each player has a utility function, and This is a well-defined utility function which is known to that player and perhaps to the other players also. What every player will try to do is to always play strategies which will maximize an expected value of this utility function. Now imagine what we do in real life also. Before we take a decision, we always look at the pros and cons, and we'll try to play a strategy which is going to maximize our utility. For example, when a student decides to take a course on advanced algorithms, there are several criteria for that. The student may think about, will this course fetch me a good job? Or will this course help me to pursue my research career? So there are several questions, and every student has his own or her own utility function. And the student would like to maximize an expected value of that utility function when the student tries to take a decision, right? So this is what we mean by rational or self-interested agents. Now, when we are dealing with modern problems, especially the internet-based problems, you realize that the system is full of self-interested agents, but in the presence of these self-interested agents, we want to come up with a socially optimal solution to the problem, right? If you want to do that, you have to somehow make the agents behave honestly. So how do you make the agents behave honestly is a very important question that we would like to answer, and it has far-reaching implications for designing all the kinds of systems that we have just now looked at in a very effective way. And
Agents behave honestly. Honest to what?
Honest to what, right? For example, the agents would like, agents have private information, right? Now, you will now design a game such that in an equilibrium of the game, it is actually best for the agents to reveal their true information, right? So you are inducing honest behavior from the agents, right? I have several examples coming up, right? Yes.
You will incentivize their honesty, is it? To kind of
Yeah, so you provide the right kind of incentives for them so that honest behavior is extracted from them, right?
So
You induce honest behavior in the agents through incentives. Yes.
So honesty is not the same as altruism.
Pardon? Honesty is very different from altruism. Altruism, right? Okay. For example, these agents also could be altruistic, right? If the utility function captures altruism, right? Now a self-interested agent with an altruistic utility function is an altruistic agent, right? It's decided completely by the utility function. If the utility function in some sense captures only the selfish attitude of the player, right? The self-interest there means that the player actually is selfish, right? So both selfishness and altruism are modeled by the utility function, and the player always tries to maximize that utility function, right?
So would honesty simply mean
Honesty, so
trying to beat the rules of the game or something?
for our purposes here, you can say that every agent has some private information. Honesty means that the agent will report or reveal this private information truthfully.
transparency.
Pardon?
It's a transparency.
You can call it transparency, but it's very simple. I have some private information and I am revealing it in a truthful way to everybody.
If I have to reveal it.
Pardon?
If I have to reveal it.
We will make you
Not
reveal.
necessarily have.
So we will make you reveal that by offering incentives.
There may be
Right.
pieces of information which are not of any relevance to the game itself.
Yes. So we may not be interested in those in that information at all, right? When you are conducting an auction, right? You make all the players to bid. We want those bids to capture the true valuations of the agents, right? And we will see how we can do that, right? With lots of examples, right? You have a question?
What if you model the level of altruism
Yes.
as a level of self-interest?
Yes.
So the self-interest, so it depends on playing around with the definition of what the agent's self-interest is.
Everything is taken care of by, right, how beautifully you design you define the utility function, right? I'll come to some examples, right, and you can raise the question again, right, after those examples.
If I'm honest, will I be playing the game?
Pardon?
If I'm honest,
No.
participate.
One thing you should realize is that the games that we are going to play are all good games, right? They're all good games. Fine.
I'm asking it, if I'm honest,
Yes.
in some sense, I'm predictable. My behavior has been
So
programmed.
game theory is all about making the behavior of the players predictable. Game theory is all about making the behavior of strategic agents predictable. You want to beat the strategy of the strategic players, right? And we'll see how we can do that, right? Sure. Okay, so what I will now try to do is I'll now take, yes, sure.
I'm sorry, I'm going back a little.
Absolutely, no issues at all.
Why did DARPA announce that competition? What was their motivation in
Oh,
announcing it?
DARPA announced the competition because they wanted to test out all these social networking and mobile technologies and how they can be leveraged for an activity like this. So it was an experiment in crowdsourcing.
In crowdsourcing.
It was an experiment in crowdsourcing, right? But it had interesting connections to mechanism design. Okay, so in this part, let's look at some examples. So game theory, as I already told you, so here is Oscar Morgenstern, this is von Neumann, and their fantastic collaboration resulted in all the foundations for game theory to be laid. And so if we have to give a definition for game theory, it's a mathematical framework for a scientific study of conflict and cooperation among rational intelligent agents, right? So that's a definition. I will not get into the details of the definition. It's a fairly technical definition, but I hope you have a fair picture of what all these phrases mean. And I will straight away define what is called as a strategic form game. Right? So this is one definition that you will have to remember throughout this lecture, because I'll make a reference to this definition several times. A strategic form game consists of the following. It consists of players. We will assume that you have a finite number of players, 1 to ... n. So little n is the number of players you have, and each player has a strategy set S1, S2, and so on till Sn, and call S1 cross Sn, the Cartesian product of all these sets, as the set S, right? So what is the set S? S is basically a collection of all strategy profiles, strategy vectors of all the players. Now there are, so the third important component here are the utility functions. So U1 to UN. So each one of these utility functions is defined from strategy profiles to real numbers. So corresponding to every strategy profile, there is a real number which will give the utility that the player I would get when that strategy vector is played by the different players. These are called payoff functions. They are also called utility functions. Now here is an example for you which you will appreciate immediately. So replace IISc by IIIT, that's all you have to do, right? So you have IIIT here, and there are two students, A and B. These are MTech students, right? I hope there are some MTech students here. There are. So these are A and B are two MTech students of IIIT-Bangalore. And so what is the game here? So it's a nice game. So either they will be in IIIT, there are two strategies. One is either they are in IIIT. If they are in IIIT, they can go to the library, or they can start discussing something very serious. And because of this, because of this collaboration, the utilities that they are going to get are 100 and 100. Fine. On the other hand, they have another option, namely to go to MG Road. Right? I do not know how many of you know about MG Road. Many of you may not be from Bangalore. So does anyone know what is MG Road? What is it? What is the expansion of MG Road? Mahatma Gandhi Road, right? Does it have anything to do with Mahatma Gandhi? So everything that happens on MG Road is anti-Mahatma Gandhi, right? So anyway, so that is one destination for students. So here are two students, A and B, who want to be together all the time. And if they are together, there is some joy, there is some utility that they are deriving. And it turns out that if both of them are in MG Road, their utilities are 10, 10, right? Now, if one of them is in IIIT and the other is in MG Road, because they are not together, the utilities are 0 and 0. And similarly, in the symmetric case, again it is 0, 0. Now, in this game, this is called the payoff matrix. Now, each of the two players knows this payoff matrix. Not only that, all the players know that all the players know this payoff matrix, right? Recursively, all the players know that all the players know that all the players know this payoff matrix. So this is what is called common knowledge. And common knowledge is a fundamental assumption which is made in game theory. Yes.
I mean, purely by going that utility matrix.
Yes.
It makes sense for every student to be in IIIT or IISc, right?
Yes.
So
yes. So I will come to that. So we will start analyzing this game now. We'll start analyzing this game, and it has some very interesting equilibria, right? Okay, so as Professor Dinesha said, one outcome which is going to be very good, and that is a socially optimal outcome that will maximize the social welfare, is 100, 100. We would like all the students to be in IIIT-B all the time. Yes.
Isn't there another assumption here that the players are taking their decisions independently without getting into any...
Okay, so I'm coming to all that. So the two players know this payoff matrix. They know that everybody knows the payoff matrix, and each player does not know the decision that is taken by the other player.
Yeah.
All the players are supposed to take this decision simultaneously.
Okay. But
it is not a sequential game.
In the original definition of a game, I mean,
pardon?
I didn't see anything said.
Okay, I didn't emphasize that. Strategic form game implicitly assumes that it's a simultaneous move game, right? All the players take their decisions simultaneously. So no player is aware of the strategies adopted by the other players, right? Here again, the two players are supposed to decide independently, right? And autonomously they are supposed to decide. So if they have to, if they know this payoff matrix, and everybody knows that everybody else knows the payoff matrix, but they are supposed to decide whether they want to be in IIIT or in MG Road, right? So as Professor Dinesha said, one solution, one outcome, or one equilibrium outcome for this game is IIIT, IIIT, right? Both of them are in IIIT. Utilities are 100, 100. Whereas another outcome is MG Road, MG Road, MG Road, MG Road. Now these are called equilibrium outcomes. They are called equilibrium outcomes because of the following reason, right? So if you have n players and there is a strategy profile, we will call a strategy profile as an equilibrium profile if, assuming that the other players are sticking to their equilibrium strategies, it is always good for me to stick to my equilibrium strategy. That is, if I unilaterally deviate from my strategy, right, with the all other players sticking to their equilibrium strategies, it is not going to be good for me. What does that mean? What it means is that if you are looking at IISc, IISc here, right? Now, assuming that the other player continues to be in IISc, right? So what do you mean by saying the other player continues to be in IISc? So you are looking at this particular column here. Because this is the column corresponding to the second player. Right now, player A is playing IISc, so gets a utility 100. Whereas if this player now goes to MG Road with the other player continuing to be in IISc, you can see that this 100 is greater than 0, right? So you will call an outcome as an equilibrium outcome. In fact, you will call a profile as a Nash equilibrium if, when the players are sticking to their equilibrium strategies, it is always good for you to stick to the equilibrium strategy. By changing over unilaterally to another strategy, it may not be good for you. Fine? That is what you mean by an equilibrium profile. So you would see that there are two equilibrium profiles which are fairly obvious here. And one is IISc, IISc, and the other is MG Road, MG Road. Now, in game theory, these are called pure strategy profiles. When you say pure strategy, right, I am playing the strategy IISc with probability 1. That is what you mean by a pure strategy. You can also have what is called as a mixed strategy. A mixed strategy is basically a random variable, a discrete distribution, or a probability distribution that you are going to define on your strategy space. Now I can say with probability half I will be in IISc, with probability half I will be in MG Road. It is like in cricket, a bowler like Anil Kumble, right, bowling the deliveries. Now when Anil Kumble bowls the deliveries, a delivery could be a bouncer, it could be a googly, it could be a dusra, it could be any one of those. And a batsman, as far as a batsman is concerned, it's a mixed strategy. So the batsman would expect a certain delivery from Anil Kumble with certain probability, right? So that's what we mean by a mixed strategy. You can also consider mixed strategies, and in this particular game, if you apply the definition of Nash equilibrium to mixed strategies now, you will get one more equilibrium. And that one more equilibrium turns out to be the following. You assign a probability 10 by 11 to MG Road and assign a probability 1 by 11 to IIIT. Right? So if it happens that each player assigns a probability 1 by 11 to IIIT and a probability 10 by 11 to MG Road, then that strategy profile also turns out to be a mixed strategy Nash equilibrium for this game. This is precisely the reason why all the students of IIIT are mostly in MG Road with probability 10 by 11, right? And with probability 1 by 11, only they are in IIIT, right? Now, this is a mixed strategy Nash equilibrium. Now, just apply the definition of a Nash equilibrium and then figure out why this becomes actually a Nash equilibrium, right? So now this particular example has 3 Nash equilibria, and you would expect rational and intelligent players to play their actions so that in the steady state, when the game itself is repeated a large number of times, in the steady state, they will actually end up in one of these equilibrium profiles. Now, in order to reach a Nash equilibrium, the only assumptions you are making about the players is that the players are rational and the players are intelligent. So just by the assumptions of rationality and intelligence, you can show that Nash equilibrium is a natural outcome of any game that occurs here. Fine? Okay. So now I have to keep a watch on my time. So I will now try to skip a few more examples. So here is the example of prisoner's dilemma. It's a very famous example. Now I will skip this example, but take you through the definition of a pure strategy Nash equilibrium, right? So at the end of this session, I'm going to ask you this definition. So all of you should follow this carefully. So I will say a profile of strategies S1 star, S2 star, ... Sn star, right? So what is Si star? Si star is equilibrium strategy of player I. Is said to be a pure strategy Nash equilibrium if Si star is a best response strategy against S minus I star. When I say S minus I star, it corresponds to the equilibrium strategy profile of all the players other than player I, minus I. Fine. So assuming that all other players are sticking to their equilibrium strategies, my equilibrium strategy is a best strategy for me. If that happens for every player, we will say that the strategy profile S1 star to Sn star is a pure strategy Nash equilibrium. I can now replace S1 star, S2 star and so on by sigma 1 star, sigma 2 star, where sigma I star is a mixed strategy. It's a probability distribution on the strategy space of player I, and now I can define a mixed strategy Nash equilibrium in the same way, right? Okay, so
S1 star, S2 star, these are special cases of mixed strategy?
Yeah, these are absolutely degenerate. They're degenerate cases of a mixed strategy where you're assigning probabilities 1 or 0, right? So you will see that pure strategies are just a special case, very special case of mixed strategies, right? So when you talk about mixed strategy Nash equilibria, you're also including all pure strategy Nash equilibria, right? Okay. Fine. So let me go a little fast, but I'll try to say something about the notion of Nash equilibrium here. So players are happy the way they are. They do not want to deviate unilaterally. So if the players are currently in a Nash equilibrium profile, so unilateral deviation is not going to be good for any player, right? That's the first point. Now the second point is that a stable, self-enforcing, self-sustaining agreement, right? So assume that all the players will go to a referee who is a neutral referee, and tell the neutral referee, why don't you prescribe some strategies for us? If it turns out that the referee gives them a Nash equilibrium profile, then the players will simply accept it, right? Because they know that the other players will not deviate from what is prescribed by the referee. So Nash equilibrium profile ensures that, right, it is good for you not to unilaterally deviate when the other players are not deviating from those, right? Then it provides a scientific way of predicting a steady state outcome of a dynamic adjustment process, right? So imagine that you are in a household and you have a father, you have a mother, you have a son, you have a daughter, you have a son-in-law, and you have a daughter-in-law. Imagine a family with 6 people, right? Now, this family will always try to reach a Nash equilibrium. Now, it reaches a Nash equilibrium because there is a dynamic adjustment that goes on. So every person of the family will try to adjust his actions or her actions so that unilateral deviations, right, are not going to be good. Assuming that the other people are going to behave in a particular way, it is good for you to be playing this particular strategy, right? So if you now imagine the dynamics that happens in a typical Indian family, right, you can say that a stable Indian family actually corresponds to a Nash equilibrium in the family, right? Okay, and then finally, it need not correspond to a socially optimal or Pareto optimal outcome, right? What does that mean? Go back to the IISc MG Road example. Now, IISc, is also a Nash equilibrium, but is that socially optimal? It is not. It is not maximizing the social utility of all the players. The social utility is actually being maximized only by IISc, profile. Fine. So a Nash equilibrium need not always correspond to a socially optimal outcome. That's a very significant observation that we will have to make. In fact, there are examples of games where none of the Nash equilibria is socially optimal.
Is it necessary for us to assume that the space of strategies that are available to each player is the same?
No, not really. The example that I gave, yes, right? But in general, it is S1, S2, and so on, Sn. Absolutely. I think there will be some examples of that.
By the way, do these results generalize reasonably to continuous strategy spaces?
Absolutely, absolutely. And in some cases, they make the analysis simpler. Okay. Right? We will have an example. Right? For example, when I discuss Vickrey auction, so it's actually on continuous strategy spaces. Right?
Yeah. When we're looking at socially optimal solutions,
yes.
Are we talking of sum total of all the activities, or we are also looking at distribution?
You can define it in an appropriate way based on the context. But here, a very simple definition of that is the sum of utilities of all the players.
So, but we have an option of defining it.
Absolutely. If social welfare has a different connotation in a given context, you can define social welfare. For example, you may like to give weights to those utilities. It could be a weighted sum of the utilities, right? A simple way is to just sum the utilities. So I will not get into this example, though it's a very interesting example. It illustrates what is called the brass paradox in traffic routing. I will leave the slides with you. So this is a very interesting example. So I have another example of a social network formation, and one more example of a graph partitioning game. I will skip these slides, but then just say something about the beautiful result of Nash, right? So all of you would be aware of this movie called Beautiful Mind, right? And if you have not watched it already, please go ahead and then watch it today itself. It's a very nice movie, and John Nash, as a part of his PhD thesis, it turns out that John Nash and Lloyd Shapley, both of them did their PhD together with the same advisor, and the advisor happens to be Albert Tucker. Albert Tucker is the Kuhn-Tucker-Karush conditions for optimization problems, right? So Albert Tucker was the advisor for both John Nash and Lloyd Shapley, and John Nash worked on non-cooperative games, whereas Shapley worked on cooperative games for their PhD thesis. And both their results are astounding results. And John Nash's thesis, which was perhaps about only 20 pages, PhD thesis, had two beautiful results. One result is the result that we are going to study now, and the other result is on what is called the Nash bargaining theorem. So if there are two players bargaining over a surplus amount, what is the best way in which they can share the spoils was settled once and for all by the Nash bargaining theorem. And so these were the two chapters in his thesis. So the first chapter in his thesis talks about this result, which says that every finite strategic form game has at least one mixed strategy Nash equilibrium, right? So if you give me a game where the strategy sets are all finite, and then such a game is guaranteed to have a Nash equilibrium. It is not guaranteed to have a pure strategy Nash equilibrium, but certainly it is guaranteed to have a mixed strategy Nash equilibrium, right? Now it turns out that a version of this result was proved for two-player games, two-player zero-sum games by von Neumann and Oscar Morgenstern, right? So these are called matrix games or two-player zero-sum games. In the context of that, they show that every two-player zero-sum game is guaranteed to have what is called as a randomized saddle point. And the proof of their result based on a fixed point theorem called the Brouwer's fixed point theorem in mathematical analysis. Whereas there is another fixed point theorem which is called the Kakutani's fixed point theorem, and the Kakutani's fixed point theorem was the cornerstone of the result that John Nash proved. Kakutani's fixed point theorem is a generalization of the Brouwer's fixed point theorem, and by applying this fixed point theorem, John Nash was able to show that every finite strategic form game has at least one mixed strategy Nash equilibrium, right?
Yeah.
And yes.
Small.
Sure.
Yeah, finish it.
Okay. And there are several different ways of proving this particular theorem. And you would see that this period of 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, and so on was a golden era in all these results, because not only von Neumann and Morgenstern, but also Brouwer and Kakutani, they were all around at the same period of time. And you can see a lot of cross-linkage of some of these most significant results happened during that time. And this was a brilliant result because for 16 years, von Neumann and Oscar Morgenstern were only able to look at two-player zero-sum games. But in one single stroke, John Nash was able to generalize it to n-player finite strategic form games, right? So that's a brilliant result. And as I told you, the proof of these theorems is through what is called as the fixed point theorems. More recently, there is a very famous result in combinatorics called as the Sperner's lemma. And so it's a lemma in discrete mathematics. And you can actually use a result in discrete mathematics to prove all these results, which actually use continuous mathematics, right? So if you want to know more about this, you should read chapter number 14 in my book, which talks about existence of Nash equilibrium and the different ways of proving the existence of the Nash equilibrium. You had a question.
There is a tradition in mathematics with Chebyshev, where
Yes.
min-max approximations were done.
Sure.
It's quite possible that some of these results are closely related to some of his results.
Possible. So in the context of two-player zero-sum games, everything is centered around min-max kind of principles, right? And two-player zero-sum games are those where mixed strategy Nash equilibria, pure strategy Nash equilibria, all of them turn out to be min-max also. Whereas if you now generalize it to multiplayer games, min-max strategies are different from equilibrium strategies and so on. I'm sure there will be connections to what Bernoulli did also. I just wanted to make the point that all of these people were living at the same time as Ramanujan, right? Though Ramanujan doesn't have direct influence on this area, right? So all these legends and celebrities were living around the same time, and the kind of knowledge they have left behind is something that cannot be measured, right? Okay.
Actually, he was very sick. He was a schizophrenic.
John Nash, of course, is very...
During that period, he came up.
Yes, yes. So this theorem itself was proved when he was completely all right. And he was in his mid-20s at that time. But the schizophrenia started much later. I attended a lecture by John Nash in 2003 in Mumbai, and took a picture with John Nash of all my students and so on. And in that 45-minute lecture, he basically told us only 6 sentences. And it was a nice lecture. Each one of those sentences was like a very powerful mantra. But then he will say that sentence and then keep quiet for about 5-6 minutes, and then the next formula will come and so on. It was a nice exhibition of John Nash's brilliance there. Yeah. So what we have discussed so far are so-called non-cooperative games, right? Now there is also a more extended branch called the cooperative games, and non-cooperative games turn out to be special classes of cooperative games. And I'll give you a flavor of cooperative games here. And I start with a small definition. So in a cooperative game, what happens is that many players will form what is called a coalition. They form a group and they play joint actions. So the strategies now are joint actions by the players. Okay, so I'll just give an example to give a flavor of what a cooperative game means, just to give a flavor. So you have a set of players n and a mapping which is called as the characteristic function. So the characteristic function basically is a mapping from this set of all subsets of n to the real numbers. So we are now looking at subsets because, as I told you, the players may form coalitions. So C, a subset of n, is called a coalition. So obviously there are 2 to the power cardinality of n minus 1 possible coalitions if you do not allow the empty coalition. So there are many solution concepts here, like we have Nash Equilibrium, strongly dominant strategy equilibrium, and so on. In the case of non-cooperative games, we have several solution concepts here. We will study just one solution concept called Shapley value here. Okay, so I will give you a simple example. This is called the divide the dollar game. Now the divide the dollar game is the following. So there are 300 diamonds or $300, but this 300 is not an integer, but it's a real number, and this 300 has to be shared among 3 players, right? So now the way it is going to be decided, the way it is going to be shared is decided by this graph. Fine. So let's see what is going to happen in version 1 of this game. In version 1 of this game, imagine that there are 3 players, 1, 2 and 3, and everything is in some sense decided by player 1. Everything is decided by player 1, because if you want to go from the source to the target, you have to go through 1 only. So 1 is like a monopolist and 2 and 3 are like dummy players, right? So we will say that the value of player 1 alone is equal to 300, and the value of 2 or value of 3 or value of the subset consisting of 2, 3 is 0, whereas value of 1, 2, 1, 3 and 1, 2, 3 is 300, because the moment player 1 is there, right, they will be able to get this 300. So what does the value of a coalition mean? The value of a coalition will tell you the total amount of utility that can be earned by the members of that coalition without help from any other players not belonging to that coalition, right? Okay, so this is version 1. Now in version 2, what would happen is that if you want to go from S to T, both players 1 and 2 are going to be involved, but 3 may not be involved. 3 is not required. So in this case, the characteristic function could be defined as v of 1, v of 2, v of 3 is 0, because 1 by himself, 2 by herself and 3 by himself will not be able to make us reach the target. whereas V of 1, 2 is 300, V of 1, 3 and V of 2, 3 is 0, and V of 1, 2, 3 is 300, right? Okay. Now, this is an example which is fairly realistic. So you have 300, you have a wealth of 300. This wealth of 300 has to be shared by 3 players based on their bargaining power or based on the contribution that they are making, right? And it applies very well. For example, one situation where it immediately applies is the political situation in Karnataka. Now, in Karnataka, you know that there are 3 main parties. One is the BJP, another is the Congress, and the third one is JDS, right? And there is also this 300. So, what is this 300? This 300 may actually correspond to some $300 billion or something like that. So, these political parties are out to usurp all this. Now, it all depends on the relative bargaining power and the relative the way in which they are able to manipulate and so on. So you can actually use the divide the dollar problem to predict what is going to happen in a political situation like in Karnataka. All right. Okay, in the version 3 of this problem, now you can see it's a little different now. So what is going to happen here is that if you want to go to the target, you had to either go through 2 or 3, but necessarily 1 will be involved. You had to go to 2 and then go to 1 and then to the target, or you had to go to 3 and then to 1 and then to the target. So now what is the characteristic function here? V of 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 0, because 1 is necessarily required, whereas V of 1, 2, V of 1, 3, V of 1, 2, 3 is 300. Now these diagrams will tell you what is the relative power of the players. I'll now look at version 4. In version 4, you can reach from S to T with cooperation from just 2 players. Either 1, 2 is involved, or 1, 3 is involved, or 2, 3 is involved, and the characteristic function will look something like this. Right. So in a situation, so this is an example of a cooperative game where what we are doing is we are looking at subsets of these players, and we are associating a value to each subset of these players, which in some sense captures the power of this particular coalition of players. Now we would like to know what is going to be an outcome, what is going to be a stable outcome of this particular game. So it turns out that there are many solution concepts which have deep connections to equilibria in non-cooperative games, and one of these solution concepts is called the Shapley value. And Shapley, who won the Nobel Prize in 2012, and this is a definition of Shapley value, and the proof of the Shapley value result is completely based on the purest of linear algebra. And what the Shapley value does is it will tell you how much of this wealth will belong to each one of these players after a negotiation process that happens among all these players. So, for example, if you are looking at version 1, in the case of version 1, player 1 was a monopolist. So here the final outcome is going to be 300-0-0, because players 2 and 3 are in some sense dummy players. Right? So Shapley basically said that if the final outcome has to satisfy properties like stability, linearity, and so on, it's not necessarily stable, but properties like linearity, symmetry, and so on. What Shapley said is that there is exactly one unique way of assigning the wealth to the individual players, right? So that that becomes the outcome. Whereas in version 2, what do you expect will happen in version 2? What was there in version 2? There, both players 1 and 2 were involved, and player 3 is a dummy player. So it would happen that it is 150-150-0 will be the final allocation, right? Whereas in version 3 of this problem, what do you think will happen in version 3? In version 3, player 1 is definitely involved, and you have to go through either player 2 or player 3, right? So how do you think this 300 will be divided among these 3 players? Pardon? 150, 75, 75. That's what you're thinking, right? But we want the solution concept to satisfy certain scientific properties that Shapley laid down. So what Shapley did was he came up with axioms, and he showed that there is exactly one allocation which will satisfy all these axioms simultaneously, right? Okay, so it turns out that okay, there is some suspense here. So in the case of version 3, the solution turns out to be 200, 50, 50, right? Whereas in the case of version 4, it turns out to be 100, 100, 100 because all the 3 players are equally powerful, right? This just gives you a flavor of how cooperative game theory can be used to predict the outcome of a protracted negotiation that can possibly happen among coalitions of different players, right, over a certain possible allocation. And Shapley value is one of the several solution concepts which has been defined for cooperative games, right?
So these games, the specification of these games, is it possible to have graded aggressiveness of players as in?
Absolutely. So that is captured completely by the characteristic function, because the characteristic function will tell you what is the value that can be derived by that subset of players, right, without help from anybody else in the system. So you would see that mapping a given physical situation into either a non-cooperative game or cooperative game is the most important thing. If you are able to map it accurately, capturing all the dynamics in the given physical system into a game, right, then half the battle is won.
Is it not a challenge to actually come out with those characteristic functions?
It is definitely a challenge, right? So you would see that, you know, when papers are written on how some of these solution concepts can be used, right, 75% of the paper could be on just the mapping the problem. So look at the situation, study the situation, look at what is exactly happening, who are the players, and what will happen in a given coalition if 3 or 4 players combine in that coalition, how exactly is going to happen. So determining the value of a coalition itself could be an optimization problem, right?
But here, I think if you're saying that 100, 100, 100
yeah,
would be a stable kind of...
It is, by the way, Shapley value is not stable, right? It is not stable. It satisfies 3 very important properties. One is called linearity, the second one is called symmetry, and the third property is called what is called carrier axiom. And these are something very natural that you can expect when players form coalitions. So if you want these 3 desirable properties to be satisfied, Shapley brilliantly showed that there exists exactly one allocation which will satisfy that.
Which need not be stable.
Which need not be stable, right? On the other hand, there are other solution concepts like the core. The core will give you this set of all stable allocations. See, for example, in the non-cooperative context, a Nash equilibrium is a stable outcome, fine, and the equivalent of that in the cooperative context, right, you can actually establish a connection between Nash equilibria of non-cooperative games and the core elements of a cooperative game. So the elements of a core are the stable outcomes, right? There are other outcomes like the kernel, the nucleolus, the Benzoff index, and the bargaining set and so on, which will give you different ways of looking at how allocations can be given to the different players.
And will there also be options of defining stability over a particular period of time?
Yes, so all the games that we have discussed so far, both non-cooperative and cooperative, these are one-shot games. These are one-shot games, but you also have dynamic games where all of these can also be extended to dynamic situations.